clear.
Okay, so I'm going to do a bit of an update of where we are in Jakarta E9. I've noticed Kevin's on the call, so he can jump in too if I say anything that he wants to add anything to. Just a little bit about who I am, because I'm wearing a lot of hats at Jakarta EE. I won't go through them all, but the one I'm wearing for this talk, if you like, is Jakarta EE9 co-pilot, which is pending in the sense that we haven't agreed exactly who's going to lead and who's going to be the assistant for the Jakarta EE9 release. Our aim is to have, someone who leads it and someone who assists. So I've volunteered to assist by giving moral support to the lead. And that's pending. So again, this is all community. So what I'm saying is, my view of where this is, but I am in many of these committees and things. So I have a pretty broad view of where we're at the moment. So I just wanted to sort of recap, as it's a sort of community call, of where we are now. So obviously Jakarta E8 was released just in time for Code 1, and that obviously gives us full compatibility with Java E8. So the aim was to have it to be binary compatible, so that we could state that Jakarta E8 was binary compatible to Java EE8. One of the big things obviously now, as you just seen on the last two conversations, is the specifications are now open source. They're open, they are on GitHub, and they're all following an open process, which is Jakarta E-spec process. And as Ari and Marcus said, they're all willing for pull requests to assist in moving these. The other big piece of Jakarta E8 obviously is the open source TCK license and the open source process, and the fact that we can actually see the code for the TCK. That is a huge change from where we were with Java E8. And finally, we've got a set of compatible implementations. In Jakarta EE, you have to have an open source compatible implementation to have a specification, and that impacts Jakarta E9 as well, which we'll see. But at the moment we have 4, so we have Eclipse Glassfish, Open Liberty, Payara Server, and Wildfly. So now that was done, there's been a bit of a lull as everyone had, took some breathing space and went to many conferences. But now we're turning our minds to Jakarta E9. So this is sort of my view of how I see the various releases that we've got over the next year or so. So Jakarta E8, as I've just said, that was the compatibility release. That's the release that is sort of the same as Java EE8. Jakarta EE9 is really what we're calling a sort of tooling release, which I'll explore a bit more. Jakarta E9 will be the namespace change. We have to move, so any API we want to evolve or change, we have to move from the JavaX namespace to the Jakarta namespace. So the focus at Jakarta E9 will be to get that done. And the other focus will be deprecation and removal of a bunch of old APIs and specifications, which again, I'll cover a little bit later. In sort of my view, one of the goals, or one of my goals I've been pushing for in various committees, is for Jakarta E9 to lower the barrier of entry for new players in the market. So the more things we can remove that are not really used anymore, the more things that any new person wanting to get compatibility won't have to implement. So driving things out of the platform spec and into deprecation, in my view, is a good thing. Then following Jakarta E9, we'll obviously be focusing on Jakarta E10, and to me this is will be the first feature release, and what's in it will be determined by everybody out there in the various projects and what they want in Jakarta E10. So if I drill down a little bit on Jakarta E9, so So, as I said, I see this as a tooling release. So, and what I mean by that is the sort of steering that we're getting is that we don't add any new specifications. We don't put in place any changes that will break upward compatibility in sort of existing specifications. And that doesn't mean that we don't do any changes to APIs, although that hasn't been decided and agreed yet. But it's possible that we allow upward compatible changes and some bug fixes and clarifications, those sort of things. The other big piece is the namespace change. So the reason we're sort of saying this is a tooling release is that it will give a stable point for IDEs to sort of build tooling to do this change, the namespace change. Obviously, there's an opportunity for tools that can migrate existing applications from the JavaX namespace to the Jakarta namespace. And combined with that, it will also give vendors like Pyara and others to explore tooling for compatibility layers or within their applications, or some external tools that could take old applications and migrate them to the new namespace. Because obviously that's going to be a big pain point for people who have existing Java EE applications. And also end users will be able to test against the runtimes and tooling and use it as a Jakarta E9 as a target for application migration, so that they know that the behavior hasn't changed, and therefore anything they see if during a move would be just due to namespace. So they haven't got compile errors due to things being removed or behaviors changing or APIs changing drastically. So it's the goal really for Jakarta E9 is to target it as a stable point in this transition over to the new namespace. So what is the planning that's getting done at the moment? So the steering committee has made a resolution a couple of weeks ago asking the platform team, which is the project team on the open source side that is responsible for delivering the platform specification. And that team needs to deliver a plan to the steering committee by December the 9th and for the release of Jakarta E9. And that plan will have to put a line in the sand of which date that we are aiming for the release of Jakarta E9. So the interesting thing about Jakarta E9, there's a lot of talk about cadence and things for Jakarta EE and whether to follow a release train model or what. But for Jakarta E9, the scope is fixed. There's certain specifications that we need to migrate over to the new namespace. So what we're going to have to do is essentially determine the date, because the scope's fixed. So the date's going to have to move around the fixed quantum of work that we have to do. So purely on a sort of analysis point of view, how do we come up with a date? And again, we've only just started the calls about this in the platform development group. One of them was yesterday. One thing we need to do is we need to do dependency analysis, as Marcus and Arian shown, just on the specification level. Specs depend on other specs. Namespace, APIs are going to depend on other APIs. So we need to look at the dependency analysis tree for this namespace change. You can't I've already done a PR for this on concurrency, which doesn't depend on much else. So that was very easy. But obviously, if you depend on another API, you can't change your API definition until that API is changed as well. And these will all need to be staged so that you can refer to it through Maven. So we're going to have to go for a model where we take the dependency analysis, we go to each one of those specification projects, and we ask them when they can give us either a staged artifact or a final release date, so that we can then ripple up through the tree of specifications to determine when we can release Jakarta E9. Obviously, a major piece of work will also be the big platform TCK project. There are a few TCK projects, but that one is going to need a lot of work once all staged artifacts are available, so that can then be converted. And there's a chicken and egg here around TCK, passing TCKs, and obviously changing our APIs. And finally, the other big thing that is required to actually do a final release of Jakarta E9 will be a compatible implementation that implements all the specifications and passes the full platform TCK. Alongside that, there are individual TCKs as well, so they will also each individual specification will also require a compatible implementation before they can do their final release. Saying all that, obviously we did this for Jakarta 8, so we have a bit of a handle on how to do this. There's a lot of chicken and egg stuff going on, so that adds to a lot of complexity, but it'll be tracked in the platform project, the progress. Also, as a final thing, we are prioritizing early delivery over any changes, so feature changes or backwardly compatible changes. So essentially, we want to pick the earliest possible date we can have in 2020. And hopefully at least first half 2020. So anything that could slow it down, we will postpone and aim to, you know, people should prioritize speed over anything else. So digging a little bit into what we see as the content Jakarta E9. This is subject to vote at the platform project level and then through the steering committee and the specification committee. But first we're going to prune a number of legacy APIs, and I've got a slide of which ones are proposed for pruning. The proposal was originally put out by Bill Shannon that I'm describing, and that's available on the project mailing list. So we'll also add in a couple of APIs that originally were removed from SE8, Java SE8. That would be Jakarta XML binding and Jakarta activation. Everything else remaining will be Big Bang moved from JavaX to Jakarta. We've also sort of agreed that backwards compatibility will be a runtime concern. So that's backward compatibility to applications still using the JavaX, the original JavaX namespace. Rather than imposing it at the specification level, we will leave that to the market for runtimes to support old applications running in the old namespace. Again, mainly to prevent the need for any new players going forward to have to support old applications, because if you put it in the spec, it's probably going to live there for many years. The final sort of question really is how we do SE11. Will it be the minimum, or will we support SE11 and SE8? And that again, it'll be subject to vote. And you know, I personally don't have concerns either way on that one. So what's been pruned? I won't read them all out, but essentially some of the old XML specifications, some of the old administration specifications like deployment and management, and the old EJB 2.1 and earlier work, as well as the old web services spec that isn't really used anymore. So they'll be removed. Again, we'll have a vote on that just to confirm that, but I don't think it's particularly controversial. And like I say, edit from SE8 will be XML binding and activation. So that's what would be in Jakarta 9. So from a Jakarta 10 perspective, I would see this as a feature release. And the important thing really from a Jakarta 10 perspective is we can start that work now in all the specifications, and you know, it's encouraged for projects to start doing EE10 work as well as doing the EE9 namespace migration. So this can work in parallel. I suspect that, but again, this needs to go out for conversation and review, that EE10 will follow more of a release train model in that the date will likely to be fixed and the scope adjusted depending on when specifications are available and have updated and can do a release to meet that release train date. Beyond Jakarta 10, the cadence of when Jakarta will be released has not been decided. Personally, I would like a 2020 release of EE10, or at least getting it to a point where it's, in public draft or something close to release. So we should be seeing progress on EE10 within specifications at the same time as this EE9 tooling release is likely to go out. So no one's saying, hang on until EE9's gone before we do anything new.
Hey, Steve.
You sure?
Yeah, hi, this is Kevin again.
Yeah, you can.
Just the one thing, and I know I've had separate conversations with people from the from projects that are working on this and looking at beyond Jakarta EE9, like if they're looking at new feature updates. And the thing to be aware of is don't go putting new feature requests into master, because then that's going to be difficult for you to separate that out for the Jakarta EE9 release that is required. So I've been advocating the use of branches, and that may sound like, common sense, but I've had the question, so I thought I'd bring it up on this call in case anybody is listening to this and wondering how to go forward with the development.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think for concurrency, we put the namespace release into the next major version, and then in a branch, and then we'll do the similar for the 3.0 or whatever the next for EE10 is as well.
Good.
And then merge into master when we're at various points in time, probably. But yeah, I mean, each project can do their own thing, but as Kevin said, it's sensible way forward. Final slide really is just a call to action. Really, is Jakarta is open. It's open source, and that also means that everybody can contribute. We're looking for people to contribute. I think every project is absolutely up for more committers, more contributors. But in the first instance, the platform dev list covers the sort of platform specifications. So you can join that if you want to know what's happening on the release planning and progress. There's a general community list, and then every single project and specification has their own mailing list, typically spec name -dev. Everything's on GitHub. It's all open source, as Marcus and Arian said. They're all willing to have PRs. You can raise issues, and each API has a GitHub repo. So if you want to do some namespace change work, then just go for it. I know a couple of APIs have got PRs by people who aren't currently committers, and that's it's good. It's good for everybody. So yeah. It is definitely a call to action for people to get involved and help us evolve Jakarta. Thanks. Any questions?
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, any questions for Steve?
Yeah, Steve, hi, this is Edwin.
Hi.
Hi. I, as an end user, and I want to contribute, I have a lot of specifications to look if there is some work needed. And there's the platform. Which would be the best way to look for what to do? Is it go by every specification and see if there are any issues open, or just start creating pull requests, or go through the platform to see on the board if there's something on that can be done? I feel it just fork a repository of a specification and do a pull request for the namespace change, for example. It sounds a little bit too. I feel I'm cutting edges there, if that's correct.
I mean, others can jump in, but my personal view is pick what specification that you're interested in. If the pull request hasn't been done, then feel free, to do it.
So literally go for it. Okay.
Yeah, literally. I mean, I do stuff. Go for it. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? Someone doesn't merge it. But in my view, on projects that I'm involved in, just go for it. And I think you will find people are grateful. I don't know about others who are on here who are project leads, what they'd like people to do.
Yeah, so it's basically indeed just go for it. So it's, as Steve mentioned, it's a specification probably that you should be like already using, involved with. So if you do a PR for specification you know nothing about, that's less likely for you to succeed. But if it's a specification that you use and you know exactly what you're doing, or you know even half what you're doing, then just to go for it indeed.
Well, yeah, there might be always a good idea to tell people that you're working on that, so no two people doing the same job. So if you drop a note in the dev list, so everybody knows you're doing that, then everybody's hands off with that.
Yeah, or create an issue first and then like ask for some feedback. So for instance, in JSF, the work for the namespace change would be based off of 2.3, and that's in a separate branch, and the master is currently going to be trashed and then rebuilt from 2.3. So if you don't know that, you would do the PR to master, then it couldn't be accepted there, and that would mean some extra work for you. So indeed, as Marcus said, it's handy, it's good to first ask which branch you should do, or if not somebody else is working on it.
Yes, exactly. So I will try to find my way there. Thanks.
Any more questions or comments even?
Okay, so maybe a comment about the JDK 11 item that Steve mentioned. So we briefly discussed that before, and like one of the proposals was, and it's by no means that it's going to be accepted or final or whatever, but that's to have two subsets of the specification basically. So you would have Jakarta EE9 for JDK 8 and Jakarta EE9 for JDK 11, and those could potentially be two certifications. So that's something people can consider or can give feedback about. It's at this point it's just a proposal, but that might be a solution.
Thanks, Arjan. I think that's kind of opening a discussion, open-end discussion at this point, right? So hopefully we'll hear some feedback over the next little while.
Yeah, so on the one hand, if Jakarta EE9 is just about the namespace release, you should perhaps only do the namespace. On the other hand, JDK 8 is quite old, and this is the opportunity to at least move to JDK 11. Most of the platforms are already using JDK 11 anyway. Most of the vendors I meant. So it wouldn't be a really big step, but it's something that needs to be discussed, and time is running out quickly. So.
Yeah, I think 11 will be in there. It's whether it is mandated as a minimum or whether it is supported.
Yeah, so that's
so
the
you
question.
Support both, or you only support 11.
Yeah, so if you support it as a vendor, like we did for Piara, then you don't necessarily have to guarantee that it works or that the TCK has passed on it. And that does bring us to the next point there. The TCK would need to be updated, at least in some way, to support verifying that it works on JDK 11. So that could also mean some work which could delay the release of Jakarta EE9.
So maybe this is an opportunity to invite everyone to take part into the platform discussion list as well, and provide feedback and opinion. We're at the point, as Steve was saying, that the expectation is by December 9th to have the proposal on what we're doing for the Jakarta E9 release. So please voice your opinion.
Yeah, so it's indeed a question of what do users actually want, what do the vendors want, what do the independent people want, and of course, how many resources there are available to actually do it.
Right.
So one of the things could be that initially you would go for Jakarta EE9, specified for JDK 8, and then at a later date, so like 3 months after, do a JDK 11 certification.